Welcome to episode number 54 of the American Regularis Podcast. I'm your host, JD Walter, and I just want to say, having this podcast has been very fun. I appreciate all my friends and family that listen to it. Those of you who I don't know that are listening to it, thank you so much. You got a special place in my heart. Do me a favor, if you haven't already, hit the like and subscribe button. Share it with your friends. The best thing you can do to help a small fish in the pond out like me is to hit that like and subscribe, right? Whether you're watching on YouTube or any of the podcast stuff, it means a whole lot to me, and I very much appreciate it. Now that I've been panhandling for your social media currency, I'm done with that. Let's talk about this week. It's another busy week. We got to talk a lot, mostly about presidents, former presidents, current presidents, South African presidents. Lots going on. Ukrainian, Russian, presidents everywhere. And Trump's basically got his hand in on all of it. That makes sense. He's the president of the United States, whether you like it or not, all right? We can't agree on elections anymore. One of the flaws with democracy, I suppose. But I want to open it up. And so far, I've got a lot to say, mostly positive today about Donald Trump. But to start it off, we were hoping, and I think it was a little pie in the sky, but we were all hoping that Trump could end the Ukraine-Russian war as quickly as he had promised. You know, it was hyperbolic for sure, but he talked about, I'm going to end it on day one of the office, right? Into the office, I'm going to end the war on day one. That was hyperbole. We know that, but 130 days in, it would have sure been nice if he could have done that. But I've got an article, some information. A lot of it's from Moon of Alabama, which is an absolute great website you should check out if you want to be in the know on foreign policy and stuff. I think he's absolutely phenomenal. I don't always agree with his economics, but that's neither here nor there. Trump, this past Monday, talked to Putin. For those of you that aren't keeping score, he's the president of Russia. And I'm going to be reading somewhat out of an article, I think it was from CNN or somewhere basic, and then I get a lot of my information from Moon of Alabama. But they're talking about Ukraine war negotiations that are going to be happening. And the Russian leader said that the memorandum could outline a number of positions, such as, for instance, settlement principles, the time frame for signing a potential peace agreement, right, ending the war, and so on, including ceasefire potentials for a certain period. That's what a ceasefire is. It's not an end to the war. It's stopping. Okay, fine. Also, of note, but I don't know of anything significant, the new Pope, Pope Leo XIV, he offered the Vatican as a potential place to hold these peace talks. I like it. Russia and Ukraine are both predominantly Orthodox, right? So it would be fairly neutral territory for both of them. And I think, it remains to be seen how this Pope will go down in history. He just started his, I don't know if you want to call it a tenure. He just started a reign. I don't know what you call it. He just started his papacy. But I think trying to end a war is a really good start. I haven't heard of anything going forward with that, though. But Russia and Ukraine, great that these peace talks are supposed to be happening. This war has gotten out of hand. It's gone on far too long. And it's a Sisyphean task for the Ukrainians to win. They can't. So peace terms should be brought up. With all that being said, they still have not met eye to eye on the conditions. And we're going to get into just how that's not even really possible for Ukraine to be the person dictating the end of the war. I know you'd think a war between two countries, historically, it'd be those guys are the ones deciding it, but it's a little bit more complicated than that. So some of the demands Putin's demanding, right? He wants Ukraine, and as well, that would also include NATO as well, for the 4 oblasts that Russia has annexed to be recognized as Russian territory: Donetsk, Luhansk, Zaporizhia, and Kherson, I believe. Okay. Now, Ukraine's not willing to cede any territory, which to cede is to give up. It says cede territory in the article I read. It's to give it up. You haven't given it up. You've had it taken from you. So it's not really ceding it. Now, to be fair, I don't believe all 4 oblasts are in complete control. It's like majority of the oblasts, but I believe there are still some western fringes of Donetsk and Luhansk, or at least Donetsk, that are still under Ukrainian control, but it's superficial. Like, by and large, Ukraine has lost those territories, but they are still not willing to budge on losing those territories. All right? However, it's not just about land. If you listen to the mainstream media, the Russian-Ukraine war is Russia, he's hungry. He's got this lust for power and this hunger for land. And once they take Ukraine, then they're going to go after the Baltic states and Poland. And then it's an existential crisis to all of Europe, which is nonsense. Particularly when you see how good of a job one country like Ukraine, albeit with a lot of aid from the United States and NATO, has been able to bog these guys down for over 2 years. And they've taken a third of Ukraine. But that isn't the primary goal. I think Russia wasn't looking for land at first. And I don't think they want Ukraine to fully dissolve. And I don't think they really want anything. I think they'll go to the Dnieper, as I've said many times on here, if that's what it takes. They don't want the entire territory. From the beginning, we've said Russia wants Ukraine to be neutral. They don't like having borders with NATO. NATO's encroached further and further east and put on this pressure, this type of provocation for the Russians that they view as a huge threat. Remember Hillary Clinton saying it was, they're moving missiles right in NATO's backyard, where the backyard was Russian territory, because NATO's moved from West Germany clear to Poland and now Finland, right? And then they were talking about bringing in Ukraine. That's why this all started. They want a buffer zone. They don't want no Ukraine. They don't want a NATO Ukraine. They want a neutral Ukraine. It's pretty cut and dry in that regard. Now, if you give a mouse a cookie, will Putin go for more? I think holding so many cards in his hand and winning this war, yes, I think very likely now it is. Had he been approached with negotiations earlier, I think there's a very good chance that Ukraine and NATO could have got for a lot less if they would have just capitulated that, yes, Ukraine doesn't need to be in NATO. It's in the north. It's simply clearly not near the Atlantic. The West just keeps hoping that Russia is going to accept these war goals that they've fabricated for the Russians, right? It's the Russians want this, the Russians want that, and they make up these things. Oh, we'll give the Russians what they want. We'll give them Crimea. Maybe we'll let them temporarily hold these lands, and then we can talk about peace talks or something. That's not good. That's not good for the Russians, at least. It would be great for Ukraine. It'd be great for NATO. They don't want what you're trying to spoon feed them. They've established their own war goals and objectives. And as much as NATO, whether it's Sullivan and Biden's administration or whether it's the current Trump administration, I know they just got rid of, the name escapes me for the moment. I want to say Wiltfong. That's not right. It's something along those lines. But regardless, you can't tell your enemy what it is that they want, especially when they've made it abundantly clear, right? They want the denazification of Ukraine. That is a less clear objective, right? That's kind of their denazified once Russia says it is. But the primary thing they want is NATO to not be on their borders. It gets more complicated because they're bringing in Finland, or they've brought in Finland now, right? So that's just more friction. But they don't want NATO on their borders. And they've made a line in the sand here. So no matter what these peace talks, however much they talk, they're just going to be talking right past each other. Nothing will come from these peace talks because NATO is going to try to appease them, and they'll say, we'll lift sanctions. We will give you maybe a little bit of land temporarily and then try to fight it in court. Even if they do that, and Ukraine has to agree to the land, Russia will not stop short of replacing this Ukrainian government at this point because Zelensky, who is an unelected official now, he hasn't, they've got this war powers like act going on, right? It's martial law. His election ran out over a year ago or something at this point. Zelensky's going to be gone, and they're going to need a regime that's comfortable with being neutral. And I'm sure the Russians would accept a pro-Russian backed government, right? Just like they had with the duly elected Yanukovych. That's not going to happen either. So this is just going to turn out. Look, the peace talks sound great, but Trump's not going to get this goal done that he was wanting so quickly. And I think it's turned out to be a lot bigger task than he originally thought. And some of that's because, I don't know, maybe the guys convinced Trump that the war goals they were stating for Russia were the war goals that Russia had, but it's simply not true. They want a neutral Ukraine. They want a buffer zone between them. They don't want to take all of Ukraine. They don't. They want a piece of Ukraine, right? Ukraine was the borderlands, the Polish borderlands. That's basically what it's named. They want it to stay that way. They want a buffer zone. NATO's encroached too long. The problem is NATO can't do that at this point. NATO's invested so much. They gave them the German Leopard or Gepard tanks, and they've gave them the Abrams tanks, and they've given them fighter jets, and they've given them landmines that are against the Geneva Convention, and they've given them Storm Shadow rockets and everything else. They've given them satellite coverage. They've given them everything they could short of active U.S. troops in a hot war with Russia. Like we've had troops over there advising, or most likely we've had troops there launching some of these like HIMARS missiles and stuff that we're not really sure they even have the capability to do. We just haven't put boots on the ground in direct, contact, in direct contact with Russian troops. That's the only thing U.S. and NATO haven't done for the Ukrainians, because that would quite likely bring about nuclear war as Putin's changed his nuclear war protocols, right? So where do we go from here? NATO can't back down. They've given so much. For them to lose, it might spell the end of NATO. Okay, what's the purpose of NATO? We just saw them give everything to one country other than troops, which they don't have much of besides the United States. So what's the point? Does NATO fall apart? If one of the terms and conditions of this war, which I think is possible, and I'd be in support of it if it ended this war, and I just don't think the U.S. should be in NATO, but if they go to the table and the U.S. says, we will leave NATO, that makes everything a whole different game. Maybe the Russians could look past NATO on their border if the U.S. isn't there, right? It becomes something much different then. But if that does go, now Europe has to militarize itself, and that takes years, and they can't militarize like Russia for quite some time. And does NATO even still stick together? There's becoming more of a rift in European politics as we see Romania, we see Germany, Britain. A lot of these countries are having this conservative movement. Now, I know it's the AfD for Germany took second in the elections, and Reform won a whole bunch in these local elections, but it's still Labour Party in charge of Britain. But Hungary, Poland, we see like there's a lot of political turmoil and unrest in Europe, and the stability of NATO is really at stake with this Ukraine war, but I don't see any way they're getting out of it with a win. I really don't. So they're digging their heels in, kind of in an act of denial of the situation that they're in, and that NATO's failing, and that it had lost a war. Russia is going to be ever more stubborn, that they aren't getting the war goals and objectives, and no one's listening to what they're actually saying. Ukraine's going to be mad because they've ruined their demographics with the number of men that they've lost, with the number of people that have fled to other European countries. They've lost valuable, huge amounts of land. They've lost public trust. Eventually, if you throw enough guys away into a meat grinder, which they constantly labeled on the Russian side, but they're dragging people off the streets and sending them to their death, whether it's Bakhmut or Avdiivka or whatever today's is, or the Kherson offensive, Kursk offensive, excuse me. So the faith and the popularity of Zelensky's down. Everything's looking rough. And to admit defeat at this point basically lets all of those things come to fruition, and they simply can't do that. At the same point, because they can't do that, they can't admit to Russia, and they can't give Russia anything. And this stupid stubbornness and failure or inability to recognize the real problems, the real situation that they're faced with, the actual set of circumstances that are involved for all parties, is going to lead to just further war. And it might lead to a complete eradication of Ukraine, even though that's not what the Russians want. They want that buffer zone. This war should not go to Kiev. Enough people have died. It shouldn't go to Odessa. Enough people have died. For it to go to these major cities, the casualty rates are just going to go up and up. And it's absolutely a travesty. There was a CIA spokesman named David Ignatius. He's a spokesperson for the CIA at the Washington Post. And he said, when talking about Putin, he still wants victory, which he described once again after Monday's call with the phrase, eliminate the root causes of the crisis. Now, that doesn't mean Ukraine existing. That means NATO encroachment, right? That's not what David Ignatius is saying, and that's what I'm reading between the lines. That's code for his conviction that Ukraine can't be a European country as it wants, but must remain under Russian hegemony. I don't think it has to remain under Russian hegemony. I think it has to stay outside of NATO's grasp, outside of their hegemony. Russia wants a neutral Ukraine, as they have stated. Furthermore, being a member of NATO doesn't make you a European country. Russia and Ukraine and others not in NATO are already European countries. This is from Moon of Alabama. Right? So when he says that's code for his conviction that Ukraine can't be a European country, that is so dumb of the CIA spokesman to say. And as the Moon of Alabama guys point out, Ukraine is already European. Russia is already European. There's places that aren't in the European Union. Switzerland, for one, right? It's in the middle of Europe. It's Central Europe. Switzerland's a European country without being in NATO. America's in NATO, and they're not a European country. They're on the wrong damn hemisphere. Just if you listen to a CIA person ever, caveat emptor, once you have them working for the Washington Post, then just don't even listen to them. It's just the goal of the Russians isn't to beat Ukraine. It's to stop NATO. And nobody on the West is willing to do that. And even if Ukraine would decide, hey, we will surrender, that doesn't mean as much because you still have, it might not be enough because NATO's pushing into Finland, right? They made Finland part of NATO. They're building the largest NATO base in Europe right now in Romania. The Mihail Koklinius Nicianu. I can't pronounce Romanian, right? It's in southeast Romania on the Black Sea, right? The Black Sea is where the Navy battles. That's where the Crimean Peninsula is. That's where Odessa is. That's where the only warm water ports that Russia has access to are. What do you think we're building the largest NATO base? It's like double the size of Ramstein in Germany. What do you think we're building that base there for in Romania? In case the Bulgarians get uppity? No. The NATO encroachment's still happening, whether Ukraine wants it or not. So it's like there needs to be two different negotiations. They have to negotiate with Ukraine and they have to negotiate with NATO, and they have to make sure NATO and Ukraine's negotiations coincide in a cohesive manner to appease the Russians. Good luck. All right. Also, in the news, Joe Biden, coming back. Not good news for him, and also not shocking news, although the media is very much portraying it as shocking news. Joe Biden earlier this week came out. He has like stage 4 prostate cancer. It's called like Gleason 9. I don't know. I'm not going to get into the nitty gritty on that. And not only that, it's metastasized or whatever. It's moved to his bones. If you guys want to know more about the cancer without some redneck speaking eloquently on it, I'm sure there's plenty of that there. But he's got cancer. It's late stage prostate cancer. And it's coming out now. People might wonder why. A lot of speculation is that it was covered up for cancer to be in there that long. I don't know. I'm not a doctor. I can't speak on that. Well, did they know that he had cancer? He has the best medical team in America working for him. He should be updated regularly, and they do health checks. They didn't find cancer until now. Is that true? I don't know. It seems fishy to me. I've also seen people write that they have the same kind of cancer, and it can actually be very hard to detect. It's also somewhat speculative that this is coming out right before Jake Tapper's book comes out. Jake Tapper decided to write a book called, it doesn't even need a plug. I don't remember what it is, but it's his book about how the White House hid Biden's dementia, which they did the world's worst job on it. If you want to check out just the last year I've been podcasting, we covered Biden gaffes and slip-ups plenty. And before that, there was him jumbling words at the 4th of July, falling up and down stairs, falling off bikes, getting lost on stage, wandering around like a toddler who can't find his parents when he was up on stage. It was time after time we saw these things. It was not well hidden. But some speculate also that this cancer might be released to garner sympathy for Joe Biden as this book comes out. I'm really not sure on that. I think that's perfectly plausible that it happened, and I could see where people miss cancer on a man who's already weak and sickly. It's probably harder to pick up when they already look like they got one foot in the grave. I know there's a lot of people, even Biden or even Trump had like a pretty normal tweet about wishing him a speedy recovery and stuff, and hearts and prayers and thoughts and prayers and condolences and all of that, which is true. Fine. I don't like Joe Biden. I don't like what he did. I think he's a corrupt crook, and but I don't wish cancer on people. I'm not going to waste all my energy worrying for him. He's in his 80s. He's outlived the average life expectancy. He was a rich, corrupt politician for all of his life. I'll save my pity for Palestinian children and those, but sure, yeah, I hope he can beat it. But I mean, to what end? There's other things right now. He's a senile old man at the twilight of his life. I hope he doesn't suffer at all more than, any more than he has to. But past that, like, it's not like a great tragedy. And I'm not trying to sound cold or callous or because I don't like Joe Biden, but I mean, he's in his 80s. He's been sick a long time. Now, I guess the main issue isn't that an old man's dying, and we can sympathize for him to whatever extent is warranted. But it lets you wonder, is this true or is it not true? Did he know he had cancer beforehand? Was this as well hidden as they tried to hide his dementia so spectacularly? It was a terrible failure. They didn't hide his dementia. That was in plain sight. Were they hiding his cancer? Some say no, some say yes. Obviously, people on the left, the Biden family, they say no, we just found out about this. But July 20th, 2022, I would like to play you a short clip of then current President Joe Biden in Somerset, Massachusetts. Listen to what he says. And this is curious. Now, this proves either he had dementia or he had cancer, if you ask me.
My mother drove us, and rather than us be able to walk. And guess what? The first frost, you know what was happening? It had to put on their windshield wipers to get literally the oil slick off the window. That's why I and so damn many other people I grew up have cancer. And why for the longest time, Delaware had the highest cancer rate in the nation.
So, there he was. Almost 3 years ago. saying that he had cancer. I believe there was a letter or something about it from his brother, more or less saying that he was sick. We need to spend whatever remaining time left we have together or something. Like I said, I don't have a lot of sympathy for Joe Biden. I've never been a fan. But if he is both, if he was riddled with cancer and senile or suffering from dementia or whatever the most accurate term is for his cognitive decline, while he was president, it's just shame on a lot of people, right? Like, even if the guy during his moments of clarity insisted that people help him, it's still like elderly abuse. And not only is it elderly abuse, like that's bad enough to hurt a single individual in a way where you're basically propping him up as some weekend at Bernie's president, but it's also a huge disservice to the nation to put in a guy who is just unfit for office. Not due to ethics or policy, but literally just unfit for office. I said before, I don't think Joe Biden could have pulled off being a Walmart greeter or certainly run a cash register. And it's just gross what our democracies devolved into, what our republics devolved into. It is a game between two parties with no consideration for the voter, more importantly for the citizen. All right. Now, last thing I want to talk about. Last week, I had an episode that was basically solely focused on the Boers and Afrikaners of South Africa and the persecution they've faced and the 59 that have came over, the 59 Afrikaners that have came over as refugee status. This got some attention. Not my podcast personally, but Tucker Carlson, many others. There's a guy who's very good to listen to named Ernst Roots. I can't remember his last name, Ernst Roots. And he's very informed. He's a South Afrikaner. And he really lets you know just many of the problems with South Africa. This stirred up enough of a commotion that it seems that they decided to bring on the president of South Africa comes to the White House. And hilariously, he comes to the White House where they sit the chairs next to each other, but not facing each other directly so you can get the camera pictures and everything. And Trump surprises this guy with a video. It's like, it reminds you of like in school when the teacher back in the days, if you're old enough, now the schools have like flat screen TVs on the wall. When I was a kid in high school, they wanted to show you a video. They rolled the card in with like a cathode ray tube TV on the back and they plugged in the VCR, probably a DVD player at that point or something. And Trump basically does that. He just points to like this area in the Oval Office with this large flat screen TV. And he's like, I want you to watch this. And they start playing it. And it's a video cut up. It's like a montage. Very similar to the one I had on this show last week. You should go back and listen to it if you haven't already. And it's of different people like Julius Malema, for sure, and different people of the ANC or the more radical group that wears all red. Economic EFF, I think it's the EFF, the Economic Freedom Fighters or something like that. And it's just picture after picture, clip after clip of kill the Boer and politicians calling for violence, saying, Julius Malema saying, we're not calling for the death of the Boers or the Afrikaners, at least not yet. And he makes the South African president sit through it and watch the whole thing. And this, of course, took off. There's been a lot of reactions to this, like, hey, watch the body language of these guys. And it's been very, very interesting seeing this. Now, I'll say this right away. I think it's a great way to bring more attention to this cause. I've seen a lot of people poo-poo about whether the South Africans, the Afrikaners, are being persecuted or it's not really a genocide. But for Trump, in this very Trumpy way, where he brings in a president of a very large country, at one point it was the economic powerhouse of Africa, that's currently not the case, but he brings in a president, and instead of like having the meet and greet, and this facade of talking about important issues in front of the cameras. He has all the cameras in front of him, and he treats them like a new Taco Bell employee. He's like, hey, you got to watch the introduction video before we can get you started. And he shows this clip, and this South African president just has to sit there and take it. And you got to go and watch the video. He gives a little look to the TV, and then he gives a little look back with this wry smile, like, what the hell's happening? Like, am I being punked? And they go through, and they watch the whole thing. Absolutely hilarious. And like I said, in this real weird Trumpy way, where it's kind of off-putting to people that hate him, kind of hilarious to the people that don't hate him. It's bringing attention to what's going on in South Africa. And if you listened to me last week, there are some serious things going on. Now, as I said, I liked it. Of course, there were those that didn't, mainly the corporate media. And some people think that the corporate media is a bunch of corrupt parrots and puppets that say whatever it is that the government or the establishment or the powers that be want to say. And there is this great mashup I'm going to play. I got it off Twitter. Looks like the Twitter handle guy is extra big with 3 G's. But this is a montage of the mainstream media and how they covered this ambush. Now just listen. We've done this with COVID. We've done this with other things. Just listen to how similar all the wording is for these guys to get in the same boat and row in the same direction to not just attack Donald Trump, but to also negate the plight of the Afrikaners.
The dramatic scene in the Oval Office today, the tense confrontation, President Trump ambushing the president of South Africa.
Next, another Oval Office meltdown. President Trump ambushing the president of South Africa.
President Trump is being accused of conducting something of a diplomatic ambush of South Africa's president in the Oval Office.
To be with you, I'm Katie Tur. President Trump orchestrated another Oval Office ambush today.
Today, Donald Trump meeting with the president of South Africa and attempting to ambush and humiliate that leader.
Zelensky territory, where essentially he was a bit ambushed inside the Oval Office.
Felt like an ambush in there, kind of like the President Zelensky meeting in the Oval Office.
This was an ambush. It was orchestrated.
Cyril Ramaphosa brought his best diplomatic self to this meeting, but nothing could have prepared him for this multimedia ambush.
What started as, to some degree, an ambush.
Well, Katie, I mean, it was an ambush.
Ambushed.
Ambush.
An ambush.
Ambushing.
Ambushed inside the Oval Office.
Okay. Well, so obviously that's their narrative, that's their spin. But first off, let's call it an ambush. All right. What's wrong with ambushing a guy whose government has agreed to expropriate, which means steal, that's government word for them being allowed to steal land from people without compensation? Former presidents, members of parliament from the EFF, like Julius Malema, calling for the murder or the killing of Afrikaners and Boers. And though the courts call it hyperbole, the whole government says one thing. Hey, they say all these terrible things, but they don't directly do it. Then other people murder the farmers of Africa, or other people outside the government launch these big things. They go, hey, no, these things are two differently divided things. I watched a Sargon of Akkad, Carl Benjamin, whatever you want to call him. It's stochastic terrorism. Like, there's like this thin veil where it's like, yeah, no, there's a degree of separation. We say a lot of things, and our legislation's biased against these people, but we do it. We call it equity, DEI, and then we sit there and rabble rouse, other people, and then they go out and they kill the farmers. It has nothing to do with us. And then the whole thing's like, no, it's clearly not a genocide. And people say it is. Dave Smith says this a lot about Gaza, and I think it's as true in South Africa. Don't focus on whether it's a genocide or not. I don't know that it meets the bar for genocide, right? It's a very subjective. It's very, because now there's like a direct comparison to it and what the Armenians, obviously the Jews during the Holocaust. Like, you have all these comparisons, and it's not like that. How about you just say this? Are Afrikaners being persecuted for their race down there? Yeah. Without a doubt. And maybe you can look, they'll even say, no, it's all economic. It's not about their race. It is. And it's about the economics as well. So just say, are Afrikaners being persecuted? It's very true. It's very clearly abundant, or it's abundantly clear, I should say, that they're being persecuted unfairly. They're losing their lives from citizens that have been propagandized to do so in some cases. They're losing their civil liberties and their property from the government. Now, because these two things aren't directly linked, or they give it this veil of separation, doesn't mean that these guys are suffering any less. The other thing I've seen is a lot of people on the far left say things like, look, these guys aren't real refugees. This one family, they left their house. They had 5 bedrooms and all this acreage and 3 baths, and it was beautiful. You're not a refugee if you flee that. Okay. That's a really dumb way to look at it. It's extremely myopic. We are so used with this recency bias. When we see most refugees right now, we think of them coming from sometimes war countries, but in America, we mostly see people fleeing as refugees from either gang violence, right, down in Central America, or poverty. Now, most people that flee from gang violence are poor also. So when we think of our refugees, we think of them as, whatever, crossing the Rio Grande without a pot to piss in, right? These are refugees to us. And that's fair. They may very well be refugees. Now, there's also statistics that like 70% of refugees in Europe go back and holiday in the countries they feed. There is a lot of corruption, or there's a lot of playing around with who is and who isn't actually a refugee. Again, what does that word mean? It's somewhat subjective. But historically, when you look at it, being a refugee was generally not about poverty. The Jews in Germany were very successful. That's one of the reasons Hitler spawned such a hatred for them, right? They shouldn't have been refugees for poverty. They should have been refugees from persecution. There's many different types of refugees. It can be war, it can be gang violence, it can be poverty, it can be government persecution, it can be religious or racial. Like, to just say, oh, this person's got a nice house, they had land, they've got money, they're not refugees. It's a very unintelligent way to look at it. I don't take you seriously if you think that there's only one type of refugee. Now, you find an argument to latch onto, and you hold on to it. You latch onto it like a pit bull on a little kid, right? That's what most people do. And they don't even really think and compare it to history or other instances and say, does this make sense? Because no, it doesn't make sense. I think these guys are refugees. Should they be coming to America? I don't know. But when the left points out and they're up in arms about 59, after millions have came here as refugees in the past couple decades. And like I said, many times it's abused. For this 59, it's hard to view it as any other way than like racial to some extent, if not like political, but the politics are so clearly racially divided on purpose nowadays. It's sick. I've also seen the counter argument that white South Africans, the Afrikaners, the Boers, they do have a high rate of being murdered. And it's like I think I saw 12 or 13 in 100,000, which is very high, right? But when you compare it to the black Africans in South Africa, theirs is much higher, right? So this isn't these are the only guys suffering there. And like I said, there's more. I think I was listening to that Ernst Roost, and there's like 12 or 13 official languages in South Africa. It's very diverse. You have the Bushmen, you have the Xhosa, you have the Zulu, and you have tribes I've never even heard of. And then not to mention, then you have the contingent of European derived citizens, right? It's very complicated there. And it's not good for anybody. There's no... Now, economically, the Afrikaners are doing better there. But that's some of the reason they're finding these new persecutions directly to them, right? Whether it's these sexual assaults, whether it's these murders, these farms being taken. it doesn't mean that the other people there aren't suffering as well. Rolling power outages. I think they said something like half of the fresh water in their infrastructure just leaks out of the pipes at this point or something. 30% unemployment rate. It's a failed state darn near. And the further they divide themselves through race and division, whether it's economic or otherwise, look, I'm not saying it's an easy answer on how to fix it, but it is ugly. And I wouldn't blame any South African, whether they're Afrikaans or whether they're Black Africans of any tribe. As far as I'm aware, I think they could all probably find some sort of refugee status now, especially with the way refugee laws are right now. So I'm extremely happy that Trump ambushed the South African president. I think it brings it to light. Maybe it'll put his feet to the fire. Maybe something good will come of it because, look, when you think about what happened with Mugabe in Zimbabwe as they took over from Rhodesia, they took all the farms from the white Rhodesians and a famine happened. And I mean, it was a terrible, terrible government of Zimbabwe. I don't even remember I can just make up the number. It was like a 2.5 million% increase in inflation. Something ridiculous. Like nothing went right there. And South Africa hasn't hit bottom yet. So I don't know. Maybe you should ambush this guy. Maybe we can save people's lives. Maybe they can find some way to run a country that's not so damn corrupt. All right. Thanks for listening. We covered a lot today. Please, once again, if you're still here, God bless you. Hit the likes button. Hit the subscribe button. And I'll see you next week.